The Mississippi River forms 190 miles of the western border of Wisconsin. Mississippi is an American Indian name, Meshesebe, which translates into Great River. The first white men to see the upper Mississippi River in Wisconsin were two Frenchmen, Louis Joliet and a Catholic priest, Jacques Marquette, in 1673. They left a fur trader's post near Green Bay, they canoed down the Fox River and portaged overland to the Wisconsin River. They went down the Wisconsin River to where it enters the Mississippi River, just south of Prairie du Chien. Upon entering the Mississippi from the Wisconsin, Father Jacques Marquette declared,
"After we arrived at the mouth of our river, Wisconsin, we safely entered the Mississippi with a joy that I cannot express."
Ever since, this great river, the Mississippi, has dazzled and seduced those who see it and live near it.
If I had only known, I would never have sold Iowa.
In 1985, it was commissioned by the state of Iowa by Chester.
This is Iowa?
Yep.
This is Iowa?
Yep.
This is Iowa.
Yep.
That was the river of the 1800s, a free-flowing river. A free-flowing river that in times of high water often caused severe flooding. In times of low water was almost unnavigable. Then a series of locks and dams were constructed in the 1930s. The navigation pools, which were created by the dams, provide a 9-foot channel for commercial barge traffic. But long before diesel-powered river towboats were developed, the Mississippi River served as a means of travel and the movement of freight. Think of the Mississippi River as a road for people to travel on, a road for the movement of commercial goods, a road for migratory wildlife to follow. This river, this road, has seen heavy traffic from the beginning. First American Indians and early explorers used canoes to travel up and down the river. Then fur traders used bull boats. Pioneers used flatboats and keelboats. Then came the romantic paddle wheel steamboats.
Before the 1930s, navigation on the Mississippi River was largely dependent on weather conditions.
It was extremely difficult.
Ed Hill is the former archivist for the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse Library.
What made the river so dangerous?
Well, it was very shallow, and of course it was not charted. A steamboat going upriver, which of course is an obstacle in itself, going upstream, But these people did not have the charts and navigational aids that we now have, or even those that came along 20 or 30 years later, in terms of where the deepest channel was, where the sandbars were, where the deadheads and the logs were, which channel even to take.
On the upper Mississippi, water depth varied from 3 feet at St. Paul, Minnesota, to 5 feet at Cairo, Illinois. The channel was constantly shifting. New sandbars and islands would come and go, and every river trip became an adventure.
But it was extremely hazardous. It meant they went very slowly. They were taking soundings constantly. If there was a stump underwater 6 inches that you couldn't see and your hull hit it, your boat usually sank right there.
Because of the hazardous navigation, the life of a paddle wheel steamboat on the upper Mississippi River in the early 1800s was only about 3 years. The first steamboat to travel the upper Mississippi River from St. Louis to St. Paul was the Virginia in 1823. For the next 50 years, more than 300 paddle wheel steamboats worked the upper river from St. Louis to St. Paul, often with stops in Prairie du Chien and La Crosse.
La Crosse was called the Gateway City, and it was a gateway in those years for points farther west, at a time when the river was still a considerable barrier to trade. And it was less a barrier than it had been, but keep in mind that bridges over the river were very uncommon in that time.
The golden age of Mississippi River steamboats was between 1840 and 1862, the decade before the Civil War. With grand ballrooms and ornate woodwork, they were often referred to as floating palaces. After the Civil War, steamboats were used to move log rafts downstream. This river road has always been used to move goods. First, trade with the Indians, then lead from southwestern Wisconsin, and after the 1850s, lumber.
Minnesota and Wisconsin had trees, and especially the southern United States and the farther south United States, St. Louis and so on, needed lumber. And at that point, the lumber companies began to develop very quickly.
In the 1860s, lumber companies were logging along the Chippewa River in western Wisconsin. They floated the logs down the Chippewa River to a boom site they had at Beef Slough, just above Alma, Wisconsin. Here the logs were sorted out and made into rafts for the sawmills downstream.
And then from that point on, the various rafters would then bring that raft down to the proper lumber mill where they would be made into lumber. There were some rafts of full-size logs that went on downstream.
The upper Mississippi River became busy with river commerce in the mid to late 1800s, and immigrants came by the thousands to explore and establish homesteads.
So that brought a lot of immigrants, many of them agricultural people, farmers, tradesmen, to the upper Midwest.
America was created by people riding its rivers, and the rapid growth and settlement of the upper Midwest can be traced in part to the paddle wheel steamboat. By about 1890, most of the money made by steamboat companies came from carrying passengers. Railroads had begun to take over the freight and mail business.
The railroads had actually put a bridge across in 1876, and that was one of the reasons for the demise of the steamboats. The railroads could go east and west, and furthermore, they could do it year-round.
Today, there are replica paddle wheel steamboats like the Julia Bell Swain that operate on the upper Mississippi River. They are excursion trips carrying passengers on overnight trips. They are a reflection of a past era.
The Mississippi River not only served as a transportation route, it also provided many forms of food and work for those who lived near it. In the upper river, there are many locations where there are clam beds with thousands of clams. Now, and these are clams, are they in a bed?
Yes,
How
what's
do
called
they
a
live?
clam bed. They're buried in the sand on the bottom, and a little bit of them sticking out. Let's say a shell like this size here, they'd be sticking out like this here. They'd be buried into the bottom like up to here.
Okay. For a time, the clam beds of the upper Mississippi River did provide a way of life for commercial clammers. Many farmers and others along the upper Mississippi River set themselves up with a clamming operation. All they needed was a flat-bottom boat, a length of pipe or wood to which were attached lines. At the end of these lines was a wire crowfoot hook. This type of clamming was called the braille system.
About every 3 inches apart, there's a set of hooks hanging like this. And this pulls along on the bottom. And when these hooks...
The bottom of the river.
Right. And when these hooks get in the mouth of the clam, they'll snap shut on it. And they'll hold on, they won't let go.
The boatload of clams was brought ashore, and the clams were put into a big tub of boiling water. The clams would open, and all the meat was removed. The clam shells and meat were checked for slugs, river pearls. Did you ever find any pearls yourself?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Yeah, pearls are fascinating.
Tell me a little bit about Mississippi River pearls.
Well, I have a few here. These are different sizes.
Oh, look
and
at those.
shapes. And
they're from clams. They're from
yes,
the Mississippi River
yeah,
clams.
each one of these come out of a clam on the river.
In the late 1800s, the Mississippi clam shells were used to make buttons. There were many pearl button factories on the upper Mississippi River. One of the largest was in Muscatine, Iowa. Whole clam shells would be shipped by paddle wheel steamboat to Muscatine. Some clammers just cut round blanks out of the shells. When the round blanks arrived at the pearl button factories, they were sliced thin, polished, and had holes drilled into them.
This here is a shell that they cut pearl buttons out of.
Oh my goodness.
That's a washboard shell.
And each one of these is a button.
Yep. And here's what the buttons look like. Like that there.
Oh, look. When they finished with this, they got the buttons out of it, then they just discard.
They throw away the shell, yeah. They'd cut all the good buttons they could out of it, then they'd get rid of the shell.
Some clamming is still done on the upper Mississippi River, but it is under federal control. There are size limits, and clammers have to be licensed. Some clammers still use the braille method, but some prefer to use diving equipment. The shells are shipped to Japan, but they don't make buttons out of the shells. The Japanese put small pieces of the Mississippi clamshell into an oyster, and the oyster makes a pearl from it.
There was millions and millions of pounds of shells come out of the river here and went to Japan for cultured pearls.
Don Valley of Prairie du Chien was a clammer for over 20 years, starting in the 1960s. Can you tell me a little bit more about how to make the cultured pearls?
Well, what they do is you start with the washboard like this here, or 3-ridge, and they take these and they'll cut them into slugs, then they'll machine them.
They'll cut this up into pieces.
Right. Then they machine them and to turn them into beads.
These are all clamshells.
These are all from clams, yeah, Mississippi River clams.
Oh, look at that.
Then they surgically implant them into oysters. And the oyster puts a coating on them after a year and a half, 2 years. And that's what cultured pearls are made from.
So many of the pearls that women wear began on the bottom of the Mississippi River. When you did make a living at it, was that something you did all year round, or just in the spring?
In the spring, pretty much, or through the course of the year when the water was high enough that would pull your boat along. And you just, you couldn't do that, you'd go back fishing or do something else.
Commercial clamming went into decline when Japan had a red tide that killed many oyster beds. And then the zebra mussel invaded the river.
Commercial clamming is over with.
It's just over.
Yeah, the zebra mussels cover everything up in the river. And the Department of Natural Resources says in Some places they're 2 to 3 foot thick on the bottom, the zebra mussels.
And when they lay over the clams, are they suffocating the clams?
Yeah, where the clams can't feed and can't reproduce.
Like the paddle wheel steamboat, commercial clamming on the Mississippi River is not what it used to be. But old clam shells with round holes cut in them can still be found along the banks of the Mississippi, where there used to be a button factory.